So I had a teacher one time who told me that it was important for her to tell us when she was making an opinion statement, or in fact what her opinions were on the things that she was teaching us. Um, she also kind of intimated that she didn't think that this was as professional as she thought she could be, but that she couldn't really see another way to do it. Now, I disagree with her because I think everybody should say their opinions about everything all the time, especially teachers. In fact, it seems to me to be the case that provided a teacher provides their opinions, they're almost like, how would you say this? You can't really bother that teacher after the fact because it's not as though what I'm about to say is fact, because I'm literally telling you this is my opinion. This doesn't have anything to do with what the actual reality on the ground is, but here's my opinion. I don't like arrow functions. There's a couple of reasons why. The most obvious one is that when I learned JavaScript, arrow functions were not part of it, and I don't like the new things. The real reason, other than that, is that arrow functions can get a little bit complicated with things like implicit return and being able to understand the way your code works. I heard something cool the other day that suggested that there was a style guide that a company had adopted where functions written in the arrow function style were literally referring to functions of a specific type. And functions written in declaration style, the kind that we just went over in the previous video, were functions of another type. Something like, utility functions versus API functions is a very, very cool idea. So that's the end of the opinion, unsolicited of course, but now let's talk about arrow functions. So there's a third notation for functions which looks very different from the others. Instead of the function keyword, it uses an arrow, which is going to be an equal sign operator and then theoretically a greater than symbol, but together they make an arrow. Well, there you go, made up of an equal sign and a greater than character, not to be confused with the greater than or equal operator, which is written in the opposite cadence. So here we've got a function called const power. We're going to set that equal to, and here's the syntax essentially. We're missing the function keyword here, where it would be, and rather than just lining up the initial curly brace defining the beginning of the block for the function, we have this arrow that basically points to it. So very similar idea here. Again, the reason the code here is not ideal is because they're not actually calling the function, so nothing here is going to happen. So we're going to do a couple of things, and this is going to become a pretty, let's say, relatively useful way for you to quickly determine if a function is working or not without having to get in something like an entire test suite. So we'll say let result equal power called on some base. So we'll say 2 to the third because I know that this is going to be 8. And then I'm going to say console.log result. And when I log the result to the console, I'm going to get 8, provided that all of this is working properly. So I go ahead and hit Command Enter, which is going to run the code, and we get 8. So this should look pretty familiar. The only difference is literally this syntax here. Otherwise, it would have looked like this. Function keyword, no arrow here. And you might be thinking, well, why don't I just keep using the function keyword? And it's because there are things that the arrow method that can do or do automatically, or models from other languages, things like implicit return and such. So let's go ahead and revert back to the original code. Awesome. Also, if you can hear that car alarm going off, my sincere apologies, but sometimes you gotta battle through stuff like that. So the arrow comes after the list of parameters and it is followed by the function's body. It expresses something like this input produces this result. I don't like that. I don't like the idea that the input produces the body of the function, because it doesn't. I'd say that the body of the function and the inputs produce the return value of the function, but that's neither here nor there. When there is only one parameter name, you can omit the parentheses around the parameter list. This is another reason why I don't like this. It's because there's a lot of, well, if this is the case, then you can modify it in this fashion. Just seems to be a lot of extra baggage. That said, unsolicited opinion, entirely possible I'm completely wrong, and perhaps it's better this way. So you can omit the parentheses around the parameter list when there's only one parameter name. If the body is a single expression rather than a block and braces, that expression will be returned from the function. So this is that implicit return thing. So these two definitions of square do the same thing. And so because there's one line here, x times x is assumed to be returned the same way it would be if we had done it this way. So we don't need the parentheses if we only have one parameter, and we do not need a return statement if we only have one line. Which, okay. When an arrow function has no parameters at all, its parameter list is just an empty set of parentheses. Fair enough. const horn is going to console.log toot, because one toots a horn. Anyway, there's no deep reason to have both arrow functions and function expressions in the language. Hey, there we go. Apart from a minor detail, which we will discuss in Chapter 6, they do the same thing. Arrow functions were added in 2015, mostly to make it possible to write small function expressions in a less verbose way. We'll be using them a lot in Chapter 5. And Chapter 5, of course, is the higher order functions chapter, so that'll be fun when we get there. You may have noticed that I'm not writing a lot of vocab words down, and we're also not writing a lot of code examples down. And the reason is that, well, this is an imperfect pass-through, right? And you want to consider that if you're reading through with this and you're following along, feel free to diverge. Feel free to write down extra things that you think ought to be added here. It's definitely the case that you can make a copy of the gist that's linked in these videos. You can also create your own replit and go to town with whatever you want to make the code examples actually work. And what I mean by that is, on this one, where we wrote let result equal a call to the function and log to the console, you may wish to write that down as part of your coding examples, just so that when you're looking at it as notation later, or as documentation later, you can run the function and have an entire concept explained to you by running that function. So that's it, another quick section that we decided to talk a bunch and make it kind of a long video, but hope you're enjoying it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.